For the last few days, the Templin Institute has been undercover across the battlefields of 2042, sometimes fighting for the Russians, other times for the Americans. As interdimensional investigators, it's important that we're impartial, but the entire time, something's felt a little off to me. Previously, the Templin Institute talked about the world of 2042, and we approached this alternate version of the future the same way we typically do most others. We discussed the big picture, the structure of governments, the movement of geopolitical power, the rationale for war, the types of things a general or world leader might focus on. But while I don't think the world of 2042 was very compelling from this top-down perspective, after getting some boots on the ground experience, I also don't think it's very interesting from the perspective of a soldier either. And no, it's not because of all the wacky shenanigans in what is supposed to be a serious war, or the fact that the same 10 people seem to be fighting each other as part of some kind of clone army, although this certainly doesn't help. Instead, I want to focus on what the Templin Institute is usually forced to gloss over in the interest of time. All the little details. These aren't the elements that are going to single-handedly destroy or cement the plausibility of the larger world, but just small opportunities to add something to the overall experience. Well, 2042 has plenty of these opportunities, and unfortunately in most cases decides to avoid doing anything interesting with them. I'll be complaining about some real nitpicky issues, but before that, let's start with some of the larger or at least medium-sized issues. The first has to do with the war between the United States and Russia and where it's actually taking place. For a conflict that's been described as all-out warfare, it doesn't really feel like that. More like a bunch of isolated skirmishes where the opposing sides just happen to run into each other. And that has a lot to do with what's being fought over. In a lot of wars, where the battles take place can tell you a lot about the strategic situation. The closer the Soviets are to Berlin, the worse the Germans are doing. If the Americans are landing in Shanghai, things aren't going great for the Chinese. But the major battles in 2042 seem to occur at random places across the world, with no explanation of how each side got there, what they're hoping to achieve, or how it fits into the greater strategic situation. I think there was an opportunity here to subtly indicate how the war was progressing, to track the progress of each side by looking at where the battlefields are placed within a larger front. Instead, trying to make sense of how these fit into a wider conflict is just kind of frustrating. What makes it worse, I think, though, is that even the people commanding these operations don't seem to know what's going on. Here's what one American commander had to say before launching an operation against the Russians in India.
Russians have been nosing around a ship recycling facility and along India, and now one of our subs is tracking a substantial Russian naval force converging on it. We don't know exactly what they want, but they are going to get it. You're being deployed to secure the facility.
First of all, the American military probably shouldn't be telling some random mercenary working for them that they have a submarine tracking a Russian naval force. That's the kind of thing you'd want to compartmentalize to maintain information security. But hey, at least they're telling me something. The rest of the briefing basically boils down to, the Russians are here, and we don't know why, but they must be stopped. And that's about as detailed as it gets. And I don't know, this isn't a huge issue, but doesn't it just seem kinda lame? Why should I care what the Russians are doing in a scrapyard? Nothing particularly important seems to be at stake. If the Russians were invading New York or breaking through the Fulda Gap, well, that's a different story. But ignoring for the moment that a ship-breaking yard doesn't seem to be of any real strategic significance, just as an experiment, what if that commander had said something like this?
Russian forces have broken through the Bobnagar perimeter and are racing towards Alang from the west. If they reach the coast, they'll have encircled 3 American divisions and cut off our last beachhead for 90 miles. This cannot be allowed to happen.
It's not perfect, I know, but I think it gives just enough details to be interesting, and at least provide some kind of stakes. These mission briefings were another opportunity to sell me on the importance of these battles, but instead it all seems kinda half-hearted. Well, what about the equipment then? If nothing else, it's cool to see what tanks and helicopters the Americans and Russians are using in the near future, and there are some interesting details here. The current M1 Abrams seems to have been updated to include additional sloped armor on the turret, and is now going by the M1A5 designation. The Russians, meanwhile, are using the T-28, a new iteration of the modern T-14 Armata. The Russians are also using an updated version of the venerable Hind as a transport helicopter. There's a futuristic version of the Ka-50. The Americans have a new War Chief Apache and a successor to the V-22 Osprey called the Condor. It's all pretty good and the kind of details I love to see. But the rest of the vehicle inventory seems kinda strange. Both sides are using the exact same scout helicopter, the American-made MD-540 Nightbird, essentially a futuristic version of the MH-6 Little Bird. So why are the Russians using an American helicopter? It's not like they don't have their own comparable designs. Where it gets even stranger is that both the Americans and Russians are using the Wildcat, an anti-air vehicle based on the modern Jaguar produced by France. Now, it's not impossible that both sides would import foreign designs, but for the Russians especially, this doesn't seem necessary, and again, just seems kinda lame. Even the vehicle camouflage is the same on both sides. And yeah, this is nitpicky territory, but it does seem like another missed opportunity. There's a ton of cool paint schemes out there. So to have them all ignored in favor of these same generic patterns that actually seem kind of outdated just makes everything that much less interesting. And some of these camouflage patterns seem better suited towards action figures than futuristic military vehicles. What the hell is Tier 1 camouflage supposed to be? Again, this isn't a huge deal, but I think it would have been kinda cool to take a lesson from World War II. In the years after the conflict, the paint schemes used by each side were often identified by the battlefields and years they were used in. So you had things like Soviet pattern, Leningrad, winter 1942, German pattern, Normandy, 1944. If the camouflage used in 2042 had been named in this same manner, I think we could have gotten some interesting insights from an unexpected source. Italian front, winter 2039, North Korea, summer 2041. I think it might have been pretty unique if the camouflage patterns weren't throwaway cosmetic details, but rather a way in which those who cared to look could get a bit more detail into what's going on in the world of 2042. There are so many little things like this, missed opportunities that just irk me a bit. How the medals and awards given out seem to have come from Hot Topic with neon camouflage. Campaign ribbons from our modern world actually look really awesome. Why couldn't I have gotten one of those? Or how commanding officers keep talking about how our side is running out of resources, as if we don't have enough wood or gold to keep fighting. Or how sometimes the area we're fighting over is referred to as a map. I can't imagine Patton ever saying that he was going to take over the map. Of course, when the bullets are flying and you're trying to avoid getting run over by a hovercraft, all the details I've talked about become secondary pretty quick. In the grand scheme of things, who cares what the camouflage is called or what the commanding officer is saying over the radio? So to be clear, I don't think the world of 2042 is severely damaged or made less plausible by any of these elements alone. They do nothing to help, but these aren't exactly mortal wounds. Rather, I think all these elements were opportunities to make the conflict between Russia and the United States just a bit more interesting, to provide some cool information in a way that's normally overlooked, to make the battlefields of 2042 stand out just a little bit from the other wars from across alternate worlds competing for my attention. As it stands right now, it feels instead like the white team is fighting the black team for control over Generica. And no matter how satisfying it is to blast apart the enemy with my tank, I can't imagine this kind of conflict would ever be that memorable. But that, of course, is just my opinion. And even though I am the best tank commander in the entire clone army, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Are these details of no importance at all to you? Do you love getting neon medals and fighting over meaningless scrapyards? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, this has been Incoming. In Incoming, the Templin Institute discusses the theories and ideas found across alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to join the Templin Institute, consider pledging to our Patreon page. Along with increased security access, you'll be able to vote in polls to determine future topics, get custom wallpaper every week, and receive some other exclusive rewards.